Okay, good day and welcome back. Today we're returning to the series on World Chess Championship blunders, and the match we're looking at is the 1954 one between Botvinnik and Smyslov. This is the first of three matches between these players. Last time we left off, Bronstein drew with Botvinnik, but because of the system back then, there was no sort of tiebreak or playoff or whatever, and Botvinnik kept his title. Now, in 1954, Smyslov qualified as a challenger through the very famous 1953 Zurich Candidates tournament, where he came first ahead of a slew of great players such as Karas, Reshevsky, and so on. So that was the background. Let me just bring up the analysis board, which we normally look at. Now, one thing we're going to find this time around is a bit recently is a bit of a change in the type of blunders. We haven't had sort of the classic howlers, jigger, and so on, and a lot more of the blunders are coming in the end games, perhaps after a long and hard game, and people are getting quite tired. Particularly the case this match, where the four errors we have are all in the end game. Have a look at the top right chart there. You can see the game score. Botvinnik is in blue, and you can see that Botvinnik was mostly ahead, and but by the end he did a few blunders, and by the end Smyslov would catch up. And once again it was 12 all, and once again there was no rules for playoffs and so on. So Botvinnik kept his title till the next time he met Smyslov. And you can see that we're going to cover four games. They're all marked there: games 1, game 7, game 11, and game 20. One blunder by Smyslov in the first game match, which is going to be a bit annoying, and then three blunders by Botvinnik, which kind of gradually helped Smyslov to get back into the match. But in the end, as said, 12 all, and he did not win the title. So let's go to game 1, and you can see the bottom right chart there. You can see what happened, that it was a pretty even game all the way through. Smyslov blundered on about move 50, and then played a few more moves, and basically it was like a one move blunder, which lost the game. So let's go to that position. Right, so it's a rook endgame, and you can see that black has a little bit of an edge, has the extra pawn, but all rook endgames are drawn, etc., etc. So it actually is a drawn position. However, there's one main resource which white has to take advantage of, which he didn't. So this is actually a good study, endgame study. What would you play if you were white in this position? And when you've gone away and thought about it, we'll go with the game continuation later, which is rook a7, which is a blunder. You can always play rook a7 later. That seems to be the conclusion. And the drawing line is actually king f3. Now, you'll see the difference between this and the game continuation. I'll just go through a computer line here, because when king f3 is played, then black doesn't have the opportunity to cut off the white king. So typical continuation would be, okay, pick up the advanced g pawn, but this gives white the opportunity to grab the f7 pawn, and this is just typical continuation because of the pawn on g3. White can draw this position. If the white didn't have a pawn on g3, then you'd have this standard winning position, which would be push the pawn there, and then you push the pawn through here. And if you remember the drawing, I've done a video on this. The drawing position requires the white king to stay in those two squares, and obviously that bishop pawn would deflect the king, and that would be a win for black. Now, so that is the way white should have drawn. Let's go back to this position, and as said, white played a fairly normal defensive move, rook a7. But what happens now is Botvinnik correctly cuts the white king off. And this makes a big difference in terms of the pawns which are left on the board. So now this is the game continuation. Not much to do, king h3 while the pawn's pinned. So check, check, can't take that pawn. And you can see that this is where Smyslov resigned. I mean, basically, he's come out with black having an extra pawn in the previous continuation, and that makes all the difference. So reminds me of something. And actually, people often mention tactics are very important in games. This definitely shows the case. You've got to be very wary of small differences. I've got a couple of books like the John Nunn one on tactical endings, and a lot of interesting ideas come out of it. So that was a bit of a pity for Smyslov. He had played the whole game, should have been a draw, and just missed that one little tactic. Rook a7, casual move, but actually he needed to move his king up and sort of make sure that he didn't end up 3 pawns to 1 down like this, and was only 1 pawn down. Okay, so let's load up the next game, which is game number 7. Okay, I've loaded the game up, and we've got to move along to about move this position, 47, 49 actually. Now, once again, you can see the game. This is one of Botvinnik's blunders. You can see very, very even game all the way through, pretty much, right? And then Botvinnik, who is black, played one bad move, and that was it. Let's have a look at the positions. You can see it's fairly balanced. 3 pawns each, minor piece each, rook each. The computer thinks it's a fairly even game. There's a couple of drawing lines. Now, let's have a look at, think what you do best. I'll just go through the drawing line here. It's not what was played. Grab the pawn. Yeah, threaten to take that a pawn. So white has this passed pawn on the king side, but the computer thinks that with the extra pawn on the queen side, black can hold the balance. Right? I don't want to go into too much detail, but you can see that's sort of basically should be drawn. So if we go back to the position, what black played f4. I mean, he obviously thought it was better to have a passed pawn on both sides of the board. Position, white played a move, and black actually resigned. Okay, so what did white play? White played rook d2, and now this changes the situation a lot. So white has the 2 passed pawns on the king side, and black has the passed f pawn. But what you realize is that most likely the a pawn is going to drop. So, and then white will just have passed pawns on both sides of the board. Bishop can control 1 pawn, and so on. So, typical continuation. Once again, as I said, resigned, but engine line is check there, check again, doesn't really help anything. King hides, knight c7, rook check. King moves somewhere. The rook penetrating by the 5th rank. So that was just one move blunder, and the game was over. So let's move on to the next game we're going to look at, which is game 11. Okay, and here's the position, and you can see it's a very similar game profile again. Just look at the bottom right, game was even, and then here about move 37, 38, just a blunder by Botvinnik, and the game's over in one move, right? So let's see what the problem in this position was. White has just played c4. According to the computer, there's actually only one drawing line, and this is actually pretty damn subtle, but let's go through what happened in the game. Black played king g4. Okay, so you see at the moment you've got this white bishop holding that pawn. Black's probably going to exchange both of these pawns for that pawn. And then you've got that position on the queen side, 3 against 1, but maybe the bishop can hold it, particularly if black can hold on to his a pawn, which in this line it does not happen. So let's continue. So c5, pushes pawn. Okay, switches off, and now bishop takes a5. Maybe in some cases the bishop could hold both pawns on the same diagonal, but because of the poor position of the black king, white's going to block that diagonal, and then one of the pawns will get through. Black should have done. It's kind of subtle. And technically puts a4. So now if the white king goes back and grabs it, then black now has enough time to get across, and that's the big difference, right? So let's say there's just typical computer continuation, same thread, swap those pawns off. Well, actually win that pawn. But the difference now is that the black king is able to, along with the bishop, block the advance of the pawn. So now, all because this pawn didn't get lost. Yeah, I mean, we could go back to this position and say, what if the king took it? Right, so that's another continuation. If the king takes it, variation. Quite curious what happens here. So now the king runs back as before. Maybe play c5 like he did before. Then we go f4, takes. Got to try and stop that pawn. Check there. King there, king f5. And you can see that the black king is going to be able to get around to block things at the back. I don't want to go through the full variation, but you can see the difference there, that just this slight difference, different pawn being held. Okay, so we're going to move to the last game now, game number 20. Another blunder by Botvinnik. As you can say, the match was closer than it probably should have been, simply because of that. Load up the game 20. Okay, so if you look at that, same idea, very even game. Well, actually, early in the game, there was a chance for Smyslov to win around about move 30, but that sort of faded away. But this is very late in the game. Blunder by Botvinnik, lost the game. We will take it from this position. Once again, endgame, very similar endgame. Rook and minor piece, endgame. Pawns are even. I'd say black looks a little bit better, actually, in this position because of, the advanced d pawn and so on. What did white play here? White played rook c4. Let's see what happens after rook c4. King e5, rook a4, so he's going for the a pawn, h7, and actually suddenly it's almost like a mating attack, and the e pawn's advancing. In fact, black. So that maneuver is what lost it. It's rook c4. That's the maneuver that lost it. White has to play much more tactically and actively. There's a couple of lines. Rook h3 is certainly one. Variation. So that keeps the black rook from penetrating, right? Once you've done that, we can apply pressure using the H file. You've pretty much blocked black's active play. Threatening enough. F3 check, E6, rook D1, right? The rook's being harassed. Now, let's say we went there. And now I think, look at this. White's able to create enough trouble, actually pick up a pawn. Yeah, so it's kind of different. What Botvinnik did, the sort of slow maneuver around to pick up the a pawn was irrelevant. I mean, his own a pawn's never queening, right? So very drawable, just a slight sort of miscalculation in the line played, and that was the end of the game. So that was those 4 blunders. You can see those 3 by Botvinnik. It is kind of interesting because you can see that's Botvinnik's head for large sway of the first bit of the match, and then from games like 12, 13 onwards, got a couple of game advantage, which kind of evaded, sort of eroded a little bit as he blundered again. But in the end, he sort of just did enough to maintain his championship. Okay, hope you enjoyed that for sort of endgamey different blunders today. And next time we'll be looking at the next match where Smyslov plays Botvinnik again. Great, thank you very much for watching.